makes a community attractive? I don't want you to call it out or anything, but just think for a minute. And maybe the practical way to think about it is to think about why you belong to this community. What is it about this community that keeps you coming back? That makes it a draw for you? Now, it's possible that it's nothing about this community of people. It's possible that it's about the UCC, which is a very open and mostly progressive denomination. It's possible that it's just about coming to worship, and you've come to worship here your whole life, and so you continue to come. It's a comfortable habit. And it feels good, and it's worthwhile. It may be because of the mission of this ministry here in this place. And perhaps I should have titled the sermon for this morning, What Makes a Healthy Community? Or what makes a godly community? Or what makes a community Christ-like? Because if we're only attractive, people see that through that really fast, right? You know, all kinds of people who are attractive, and they got nothing. Shallow, all surface, all facade, right? So if we're only attractive, and there's no substance, people will come in, and then they might leave.
Oh, is that better? Thank you, William. Where was I? So, we don't want to just be attractive, and in fact, we really want to look at what it means to be healthy or Christ-like or godly as community. But on the other hand, and there are all kinds of hands here, to be healthy or Christ-like or godly as a community doesn't make you the church. So your golf team can be Christ-like. It doesn't make you the church. Your bridge club can be a godly place. It doesn't make you the church. Your social affiliations can be healthy, good relationships. That doesn't make you the church. Swiss theologian Emil Brunner says, the church exists for mission, like fire exists for burning. Mission is the inherent core of the church. So just to be an attractive community doesn't make us the church. And here's my apologetic, okay? I don't often preach about this stuff about community because I think it's somewhat natural. Those of you who've been in the church community for a long while, it was the core of some of your social relationships. It's where you shared ideas about parenting, and when something happened with the kids in the law, you went to your friends in the church and said, ah! And when you had work issues, you came to your friends at the church, and some of you still have that. These are the folks with whom you share life. It's a natural, normal thing. But you see, that doesn't make you the church. And so my tendency is to preach about mission. Because mission is what the Bible's about. Mission is what a follower of Jesus is to be about. And the good news is that there are healthy relationships. There is attractive community. And that's part of good news. There's a place where we experience healing and hope and forgiveness and mercy and support and encouragement and challenge and stimulation and all of those good, godly, Christ-like things. And I want to suggest, if we are that kind of healthy godly, Christ-like community, we will be attractive. And by the way, what is an attractive community is a much better title than what is a godly community. That's just the real deal. So, what's the foundation for the community of faith? It starts in God, right? God said, let us make humankind in our image. God is community. And we're created in God's image. We need community. We aren't community. Well, some people think they're me, myself, and I, but we're not community, right? We need other people. No one is an island. We're created to need community. That's where it starts. And then throughout the Hebrew scriptures, we see God working hard at keeping that community between God and humanity together. And humanity likes to not stay in those relationships. Over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, the Israelites, God's special called people who got a special measure of God's love, went whoring. Yeah, you heard me right. W-H-O-R-I-N-G. Whoring after other gods. Read the prophet Hosea. It's a book about God's relationship with the people as lover and beloved. Only when the beloved went away, whoring after the other gods, this spouse didn't ask for a divorce. This spouse chased, pursued, looked like an idiot. Desired, above all else, to be in relationship. Forgave over and over and over and over and over and over again to be in relationship with those people. That's the kind of God we are in relationship with. A God who gives love extravagantly over and over. A God who is faithful. A God who forgives and is merciful no matter what. That's why we can say as a denomination, wherever you are on life's journey, whoever you are, you're welcome. Here, we like that, but it's in God's presence. God welcomes us no matter what. Jesus' ministry was all about God on earth doing that. So what had happened is, the Israelites had created this set of rules. Because they tended to go off and do their thing with other gods, they said, we need a set of rules that will help us figure out how to stay in relationship with God. Rules are good, right? It's good to have guidelines and boundaries and all that. But here's what happened. The rules became the God. Right? Only if you follow the rules do you belong. Can you get in? Are you included? And in Jesus' day, it was extreme. If you were sick, think leprosy, you're out. If you were mentally ill, think demon-possessed, you're out. If your behavior was bad, think prostitute, you're out. If you did the wrong kind of work, colluding with the enemy like the tax collector, you're out. And in that day, it was essential to be part of the community. Unlike today, where you can pretty much live by yourself. As long as you got a job, probably, or good retirement income. But in that day, you didn't survive without a community. So there were the ins and there were the outs. And Jesus' goal in his ministry was to take down those walls, those barriers that kept the outs from being out. He said to the people, no, God doesn't exclude who's in. God pursued the whore, remember? Everyone gets to come in. everyone gets the benefit of the community. And it was such a dangerous message that he died for. But the early Christian community picked up that message, and in Acts 2, we read that the kind of community that they were was so attractive, 5,000 in one day. Well, that would grow your church, wouldn't it? So what was it about that community that was so attractive, that it drew people to itself by the droves? Well, that's what I want to explore for the next few weeks. And I got to tell you, as I'm writing this sermon today, it was difficult because I tend to want to go off on mission. So forgive me. Hopefully we can, dig up some of these ideas about what it means to be a attractive community, and we can talk about them together. Especially in the coffee hour, please share what you've heard and what you think and what it means for you in particular. And then tell me what you heard. It'll be really helpful. So I'm starting, there are these texts in the New Testament called the one another passages. They start with the text that Peg read this morning from the Gospel, where Jesus says, love one another. And they end with the text in 1 Peter, which in one version, not this version, but one version says, live in harmony with one another. And so this morning, for just a few minutes, I want to explore that idea of loving one another and living in harmony with one another. I expected to be up there way sooner than I am. So we begin with Jesus' words in John 13. This is, remember Randy Powell, she preached that, or he did that book, The Last Lecture, right? This is Jesus' last lecture, his last sermon, his last talk with his disciples. The things that he thinks are the most important, he's leaving with his disciples, this section of John. And one of the things he says is, love one another as I have loved you. This is a new command, he says. And I think there are many things that could mean this is a new command, but I think one of the most important things that it means is that this is about behavior, not feeling. Imitate me is what he's saying. Do what I do. It doesn't matter if you feel like it. Do it anyway. And then I think there are three things from, and I'm stealing from Rich Myers a little bit, these three things, and then I've kind of tailored them to our setting, to my own thinking. Three things that Jesus did that were love in action. The first one is he was realistic. Okay, Jesus had 12 disciples. Count them, 12. And people know that psychologically that's a good size for a small group, right? When you want to get intimate with people, it's about as big a group as you can be with to be intimate and loving. Then Jesus had another small group of 3 that he was even more intimate with. We got the benefit of seeing those relationships and how they worked. Then there were bigger groups. Jesus sent 70, trained them, sent them out on mission. He sent 120, trained them, sent them on mission. So there were different sized groups we know that Jesus hung out with. But the 12 and the 3 were the intimate groups. And then Jesus was alone. He went off to be by himself. He wasn't always with people. He needed to get refreshed and renewed on his own. So this idea of setting boundaries, we talk about it in psychology today, right? Of having limits about how much you share with who. That's healthy. That's good. That's godly. That's Christ-like. It does speak to the issue of small groups in the church. If we're going to get intimate with one another, this is too big of a group right here. So, let's think about prayer time for a minute. You know, it's good to say, I need prayer. Especially some of you who never say, I need prayer. You know who you are. Because we need to be reminded that we all need prayer. We all need support. We all need to be taken care of. We all face hard times, tough situations. So we all need to say it. And if you're not saying it, we still know you need prayer. And some of us need to cut back a little bit. You know, your small group is where you share the intimate details of why you need prayer. And I'm not criticizing anyone for what has been said. You're all pretty much appropriate. But you get, there's a fine line there, right? Between bearing your soul in a public place and not saying anything because you're too cool. So, being realistic about that, being in community and being alone. And there's a balance. And maturity means working that balance, figuring it out, getting it right, or trying, seeking to get it right. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this idea of intimacy. So Jesus was realistic, but he was also intimate. So, you know, realistic, I think kind of a heady thing, like, keep it in my head. If I just think about it, I can get it right. But intimacy is like in the heart. So these two things have to be connected so that we can get the intimacy right as well. So often it's been true that people come into the church and they wear their Sunday best and they put on their prettiest smile and everybody thinks everything's okay. And on some days it's probably true. But not every Sunday and not every day for sure. And so, among your people, among a faith community, it has to be okay to not wear your Sunday best, to not be at your best. Wherever you are on the journey, right? Whether it's a good day or a bad day. If you're in a slump or if you're up on the mountaintop. Lillian Daniel writes a column about church. She calls this part of the church being real. She's a UCC minister in Glenelg, Illinois, by the way. She says, I want the church to be real. I want there to be room for the people who don't follow through, who don't show up, and who don't get what any of this is about. I want the church to admit that sex, drugs, and rock and roll are a tempting trinity for a reason. I want mental illness to be listed in the prayer concerns as often as cancer treatments and surgeries. And if it's all you can do to get out of bed in the morning, I want you to come to church in your jammies. I dare you. Maybe I will. So intimacy is about the good, the bad, and the ugly. David Redding writes a book called Jesus Makes Me Laugh, and in it he talks about a retreat center that functions like the church ought to. And this is what he said. People are looking for a place where they can give themselves away until it hurts a little and makes you feel lighthearted. A place where you can give yourself away till it hurts a little and then makes you feel lighthearted. That's the irony, right, of being intimate, of sharing with one another, of letting your masks down. So there's another wonderful analogy for this idea of getting balance between the too close and too far apart. And it's the image of porcupines, right? Porcupines apparently need to stay close in order to stay warm. But if they get too close, they start sticking each other. So there's that balance of, we need to be close enough that we know one another and that we feel known. And here's where Facebook doesn't work, right? All kinds of people think that by posting their intimate details on Facebook, they're known, and all they are really is vulnerable. And some people realize that, and then they start putting all their good stuff up there, and they're not really known. They're just keeping up with the Joneses. Healthy, Christ-like, godly community is that balance of being known and not sticking each other with your stuff. Right? So, some of us need to work on a little more vulnerability. And some of us need to work on a little more boundary. We all have something to work on. So, I wish I could find a source of this quote. Maybe someone knows it and can tell me. Someone once said, I didn't make this up, I didn't originate this, that if you're afraid of community, you should be wary about being alone. Because all you're going to do is be alone if you're afraid of community. If you're afraid of community, be wary of being alone. And if you're afraid of being alone, be wary of community. It's way too easy to do what comes naturally, right? And so we need to stretch ourselves and each other. We need to go out of our comfort zones to be this kind of healthy, Christ-like, godly community. So Jesus was realistic, he was intimate, and he was intentional. And that's to get to this we need to work on it point. We all have something. We say of parenting, quality, not quantity, but you need quantity in order to have quality. And then 1 Peter 3, verse 8 says, as far as possible, and I love that qualifier, live in harmony with one another, as far as possible. Getting that it's not going to be perfect. We're not always going to get it right. So here are a couple other statements that I thought help us to modify this idea of what it means to be in harmonious community. Melton, who was one of the reformers, worked with Martin Luther, said, in essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. And in all things, charity. In essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. In all things, charity. So the trick is, right, figuring out what are the essentials. And that's what we need to talk about. I think the UCC is pretty good at making a big, roomy space. And this is the second quote that I found that I thought really helps with this idea of beliefs versus values. In many UCC churches you have varying beliefs because people come from all over the place. So you've got conservative theology and liberal and progressive theology. You've got conservative politics, you've got liberal politics. You got all kinds of beliefs. But the values seem to be what's important in UCC congregations. That we lift up and praise God's love for us. That we let people know about that. That we do mission. That we're involved in caring for the most vulnerable in our communities. These values are important. I think issues in France this week kind of illustrate the difference between beliefs and values. You know, the people were killed because there's a difference in belief about what freedom is and how you get it. They didn't believe that free speech is legitimate, even if it's in bad taste. But if the value were the same, if the value were that people can speak freely, then maybe no killing. So the difference between beliefs and values. I think another really good example is the example of an orchestra, or the example that I used with Seamus this morning. There are many kinds of light, and those of you who are engineers and have that kind of mind, there are probably other kinds of light besides the few that I pointed out. But the other analogy that's applicable, I think, is the analogy of an orchestra, right? An orchestra makes an amazing sound when each person in the orchestra does their part. So an attractive community isn't to make us all homogeneous, all the same, all clones of one another. It's about each of us being the best we can be. And that's that idea of balancing intimacy with maturity or our own sense of self.